Oi oi, it's your boy, the Stipe Miocic of Calling to Eat the Rich, the Vivian Araujo of If You Can, You Should Do So. Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Wednesday the 19th, and we've got two walk it across the line events this weekend. Did you ever, as a child, if you're out on your bike with mates, did you ever do that thing where you tried to pedal as slow as possible while staying, technically riding the bike without having to put a foot down? That is what Bellator and the UFC are doing here. They're playing a game of chicken incredibly slowly and with very little effort. Though actually riding a bike quite slowly does take effort. But yes, the cards, they're not stellar. But there might be some good stuff on there. You can never work out what the UFC thinks of Cody Garbrandt. I think they think he's a massive star, but I also don't think that any of their metrics show him to be a massive star. Could just be like residual love for Uriah Faber. Hell, it could be like Michelle Waterson. Michelle Waterson, they seem to think she's a massive star. Some of the events that she's headlined have done surprisingly good buys, but the metrics that me and other people in the media, though I am not the media, I'm an outsider, but the metrics that we people making content use are how many people clicked on this compared to normal. And if nobody wants to read or listen to post-fight or pre-fight shit about Michelle Waterson, but for some reason they tune in. Presumably they're the kind of neck-breathing casual fan who's like, maybe there'll be a wardrobe malfunction. But you know what I mean? There are fighters who, if you hear about them fighting, you go, maybe I wasn't hype all week about it like I would be for McGregor Habib or something like that. But, if it's on, I'll watch it. And those are the ones who sort of fuck with my metrics. But we're not about metrics. We're not a metric-chasing show. We're not chasing clout. We just achieve it naturally. Anyway, we're talking about UFC Garbrandt versus Rob Font. And this, that fight in itself, pretty interesting. I'm a large supporter of Rob Font. And Cody Garbrandt, as I always say, one night only, he was the smartest fighter on earth when he completely bamboozled Dominic Cruz. And then he just wasn't. He went back to being this utter meathead. But he is still one of the amazing physical talents in MMA. And he has that one punch put you out power, which is, a huge selling point. I was going to say, especially in lower weight classes, but pretty much everyone at bantamweight can kill you. For some reason, flyweight, nobody can really hit. Bantamweight, everyone can kill you. Featherweight, yeah, they're all right. I don't know why, but the top end of bantamweight is just full of murderous strikers, with the exception of champion Aljamain Sterling. Actually, I was talking about the makeup of the champions this week. Someone brought it up, and I went to Wikipedia to look at the current list of champions with nationality next to them. And yeah, really interesting. Even if you want to claim Kamaru Usman as American and Francis Ngannou as French rather than Cameroonian and Nigerian, and Izzy as a Kiwi rather than Nigerian, even then, it's still people from all over the world and all kinds of styles, which is amazing because the sort of thing that was worrying me a little while ago was when people were hypothesizing that soon everything would taper towards one sort of style. Every champion would be an American D1 wrestler. Wrestling is still don't take this as wrestling isn't important, but there are all sorts of fighters in MMA, and there are all sorts of people making it all the way to the title, which I think is brilliant. That's exactly what you want from MMA. This isn't me being every color of the rainbow and every racial or ethnic background or whatever. No, this is me being people can come from anywhere and have any sort of style, and they can make it work for them. And I think that's awesome. That's what you want. You want your Street Fighter cast of characters. You don't want 15 dudes who are all D1 wrestlers and all have Drew Dober's jawline. It's just, it keeps things interesting. And we're in such an interesting place. You've got Ngannou, knockout artist, top heavyweight. Jan Blachowicz, weird-ass grappler and counterpuncher. Israel Adesanya, one of the best kickboxers we've ever seen in MMA, and one of the best kickboxers in the world at the time that he was kickboxing. Kamaru Usman, D2 wrestler. Charles Oliveira, amazing wrestler despite no wrestling background, ground wizard, Alex Oliveira, Alex Volkanovski, kickboxer with wrestling taught from rugby. It goes on and on. And it just, it's such a great place to be, because a little while ago, there was a small period where Jose Aldo was the last non-American male champion, I think it was. And it was like, yeah, we're just sort of waiting for this Brazilian to fuck off, and then it's all Americans all the way down. Obviously, a lot of these guys train at top camps in America, but yeah, it's just interesting, all these people from different backgrounds. Anyway, let's talk about these fucking fights this weekend. I'm going to be honest, there's a lot on this card, there's a lot of names on this card that I don't really recognize, and I haven't had time to go back and familiarize myself with their most recent performances and shit. So we'll talk about the things that actually matter. And my actually matter might be different to your actually matter. For instance, I don't believe that Carla Esparza versus Yan Xiaonan or Xiaonan Yan matters, even though it's going to be like next title contender. But we'll kick it off with the main event. Cody Garbrandt, interesting character, amazingly talented, had that great fight against Dom Cruz, had a couple of interesting performances against TJ Dillashaw, got drawn into brawls and knocked out twice famously. But people have sort of forgiven that because of TJ Dillashaw's getting caught using EPO. Now, I say getting caught because Cody Garbrandt has unintentionally outed himself for using PEDs several times. But, it's amazing. People just go, well, no, it's because he's stupid. He didn't mean to say that. You're like, there's not too many ways you can interpret him being like, I know TJ cheats because he's the one who taught us all how to do it. Like, no, how was that meant, Cody? How was that meant in a way that if you weren't stupid, it would make sense and not incriminate you? But my policy on PEDs in sports is I don't give a shit because, I'm an adult. However, it was Pedro Munoz's loss that really hurt him because, people weren't willing to forgive that. And, Pedro Munoz wasn't regarded in the same way that he is now. That was very much like a coming out party for him. So he was out of action for, the best part of a year. I mean, he was booked basically a year to the day from the Pedro Munoz loss to the Assunção fight, but then the Assunção fight got pushed back a few months. Fuck, I just I just clicked for details on why that was cancelled, and Garbrandt kidney issues. Fucking hell. Not a full year out of action like Manny Pacquiao, like a year no contact, but still good to get away from, from everything once you've had a horrible knockout or three back to back. And in fairness to him, he had those knockout losses were 2017, 2018, 2019. He basically had a year between each fight anyway. But 2020, he comes back. It was June. He fought Rafael Assunção, and he scored his first victory since 2016, which is brilliant. He scored an amazing knockout. The thing about the Assunção fight was, I think I pointed out at the time, I might be full of shit, but I think most of us pointed out, like, it sort of goes two ways, because Assunção was a guy that most people didn't want to fight, because he's a very tricky fighter, but equally he was a fighter who was probably never going to knock Cody Garbrandt out. He was never going to ask those big questions of Cody's chin. It was sort of protecting Cody from that in that sense. And then you had to sort of rely on Assunção being able to make it through the full 3 rounds without getting blasted out of there when he doesn't really have a whole lot of power to keep Cody off him. But again, like I said, people weren't lining up to fight Rafael Assunção because a lot of the time he just sort of makes you look bad and wins a boring decision. With this Rob Font one, you've got another sort of interesting matchup because obviously Rob Font is more dangerous. There's more chance of getting knocked out by Rob Font than there is by Rafael Assunção. But also Rob Font relies a lot on his good technical boxing, his hand speed, establishing the jab, which is something that we haven't really seen a lot of people try even against Garbrandt. And that's one of the big intrigues of this matchup. We were supposed to have Garbrandt versus... we were supposed to have Garbrandt versus Davison Figueiredo for some reason. But then, because the UFC loves him, that's why. And then we were supposed to have Sean O'Malley versus Cody Garbrandt, but neither of those actually came to fruition. So this is the one we got. And in fairness, it's actually a top contender, which is good. But Rob Font, where's he at in his career? He's 4 years older than the Garbrandt. And to be fair, like his last loss in 2018 was against Rafael Assunção. So, very tricky motherfucker. And, his loss before that was that guillotine choke against Pedro Munoz, which I think he was winning the whole fight and then Pedro Munoz just guillotined him, but I can't remember. But, most people sort of picked up on him when he was when he knocked out Thomas Almeida, because Almeida was very highly regarded. And I think he'd only lost to Cody Garbrandt at that point. But since that, since the Rafael Sunsao loss in 2018, he fought Sergio Pettis, now Bellator bantamweight champion, and he made him look rubbish. That fight was all Font. Basically, it did look like a flyweight versus a bantamweight, and it looked like Sergio Pettis was not only smaller but slower. So Rob Font could definitely be Bellator bantamweight champion if he loses this and leaves. But then he beat Ricky Simone, tricky wrestler, Tricky Ricky, that's what they call him on this podcast just now, from now. And Marlon Moraes is the most recent one, and that, again, obviously, big name for him. But Moraes, very much suffering from chin issues and coming back too soon. Like, he's doing the exact thing we say you shouldn't do. He got wheel kicked by Corey Sandhagen, came back 2 months later. Just there. Even if you come back like a year later, there is time up to that return where you've been sparring. So if you come back 2 months after getting knocked out, there was never a no contact period unless you came in without sparring altogether. It's just ridiculous. It's one of the things that hacks me off about the UFC does it too, but Bellator, rebooking people like before the end of their medical suspension. So you don't book them to fight inside their medical suspension, but you have to know that they'd be training within their medical suspension. I mean, Cyborg Santos, when he was booked against MVP, he'd just been TKO'd by about 500 unanswered punches about 2 months before. So that there wasn't really like a significant period where he wasn't getting hit in the head between those fights. But again, that's down to the fighter. They're independent contractors, whether they take the contract or not, or, whether they give themselves time to train or not, and or time to recover or not, down to them. As Hunter, the UFC lawyer, would probably say. But if you remember that, it was really where we were very confident that Marlon's chin was somehow affected because Rob was just touching him with the jab. I mean, that's a Cody Garbrandt expression, isn't it? I'll touch him with my jab. I'll knock him out by touching him with my jab. But he did. He jabbed him in the face and Marlon was on stanky legs. But that sort of brings us on to my main sticking point in this matchup. And it's the Rob Font jab. Can he use it against Cody Garbrandt? How can Cody Garbrandt deal with it? Garbrandt, the thing that everyone knows Garbrandt for is his tremendous speed. He has a great jab in his own right. You never see it. He threw it a couple of times against Henry Briones, and he threw it a couple of times against might have been Marcus Brimage. That dude had a really rough few fights in the UFC. He met a debuting Conor McGregor and a debuting Cody Garbrandt. But the thing that Garbrandt does a lot is swarm over distance. If you watch him, I mean, it was the thing that blew my mind in that Dom Cruz fight. I talk about it so much, and again, I'm going to plug it in this episode a couple of times, but you should go and read Absolute Masterclass Garbrandt versus Cruz. It was part of the Absolute Masterclass series, which is just focusing on individual fights where I thought a fighter just took their opponent apart perfectly. You trained specifically for that man, and whether or not you're the best in the world that night, you were the best person to beat that one person, and that's what he did with Cruz. But up until then, he'd just been sort of running in, shifting with punches and shit like that. And then against Cruz, he's the most contained and controlled fighter in the world. And there were those moments where he was slipping Cruz's punches and stuff. But the thing is that Cruz, I'm going to say not a good boxer, but to clarify, there are a lot of elements of boxing. And this is something that I always used to get into far too much when people would ask me to list my top 10 boxers in MMA or whatever. But footwork is a huge part of boxing, and Dominic Cruz is marvelous at that. Ringcraft is a huge part of boxing. Dominic Cruz is marvelous at that. And those are elements that most people in MMA, even the guys you consider good boxers, are not very good at. Nate Diaz, considered good boxers because of their hands and their combinations, not good with their footwork and definitely not good with their cage awareness. JDS, amazing hands, in one regard a very good boxer, keeps running himself straight backwards onto the fence. Not a good boxer. There's a lot of elements going into it. So when I say Dominic Cruz not great boxing, I mean not great hurting people with his hands, not great at throwing straight shots aside from the jab, really. Not great at combination punching. And when he does, he tends to swing wide with those straight arm swings. And those were the ones that Cody Garbrandt was doing all the awesome head movement against. I'm very interested to see if Rob Font can, stay close enough to establish that jab as a threat and establish the feint as a threat. The thing that Dom Cruz the thing that Cody Garbrandt exploited in Dom Cruz was the need to cover huge amounts of distance. He springs back from his stance and then into his stance, and he's going back and forward like that all the time. And every time he stepped in, as if to step, sometimes he's stepping in for real, sometimes he's stepping in as a feint. But every time he did it, Cody Garbrandt would just establish more distance and say, no, do actually come to me. And then whenever Dominic Cruz wanted to actually go and hit him, he had like twice the work to do, and he'd really be committing and taking that extra step. And that's where Garbrandt was able to counter him. And interestingly, that's where Pedro Munoz countered Cody Garbrandt. If you're having huge trouble with the hand speed and the speed and power of the punches, take a step back and make him step. And you know that when he steps in, he's going to be punching with it, so you just counter the step. And that's what Pedro Munoz did against Garbrandt. Every time Cody took a big step to chase to him, to close that distance, he'd slip off to the left and throw a big overhand. And he worked a treat. But to establish the jab as a threat and to benefit from all those feints that he makes, Rob Font has to stand close enough for the jab to actually be a threat. And that's something very dangerous to do against a guy who's as powerful and fast with his hands as Cody Garbrandt. What I don't know is, how good is Cody Garbrandt at slipping and countering blows from a closer range? You watch him against guys like Rafael Assunção and stuff, they take big lunges towards him. It's not like they're getting into a strict boxing distance where they can just reach out and touch him. But range is going to be a huge thing in this fight. There are two real ways I could see someone making Cody Garbrandt have a hard time. One of them is do what Pedro Munoz did, take a step back, make him do exactly what he was making Dom Cruz do, make him close too much distance, make him really commit to every charge and counter the step. And the other one is to crowd him, put him against the fence, and then try and establish the jab or whatever. But we all know that Cody Garbrandt's chin isn't the best, and that his head is kind of up in the air when he's throwing punches. Now, you've got the issue of getting caught by him because he'll put you to fucking sleep, but if he gets hit, he tends to either 1, freeze, or 2, get mad and throw back. And as much as we can talk about how that's bad fight IQ or bad discipline or whatever, if you get hit hard, there's not a lot you can do to change someone's reactions because they're not reacting like in a measured, thoughtful way. They're reacting in the way that they've reacted their whole life. It's going to take a lot of training to get you out of that habit. So honestly, crowding him to the fence and trying to establish the jab and hit him with right straights and coming back, covering and coming back with short counters when he's throwing to try and get off the fence might be a good idea. But I think probably stretching him out and making him close the distance over a longer distance is probably the better method. I just don't know how good Rob Font is at that. If you watch his fight with Thomas Almeida, absolute buzzsaw on the counter. Rob Font used the jab so well that he had Almeida slipping things that weren't coming and standing still for things that were. And then if he could get him leaning, he'd try and head kick him while he was leaning. It was a really brilliant performance. In fact, there was a part, I think it was the time he pumped his shoulder for a fake, then he threw the actual jab, and Almeida slipped both, but he was so deep in the lean that Font just hit him with a short right hand in the lean and knocked him down. And, that's the role of the jab. Pull people out of position, hit them when they're out of position. Now, Garbrandt has a good jab in his own right, but he's been falling back on the calf kick a lot lately, which is something that Pedro Munoz used against him to terrific success. If you watch that Assunção fight, he's basically just standing in sort of mid-distance. He'll kick at the calf, and then when he's close enough to kick the calf, he knows he's close enough to wade in, throwing the right-hand lead and then shifting through. He has these amazing hands, and I would love to see him jab and double jab and stuff like that, but he's just not going to do it. I'm very intrigued always actually by the wrestling for Garbrandt because he was a successful wrestler in school. He has taken down some good guys in MMA, but it's always been like an afterthought or like just something he mixed in to mix things up. I think it'd be very interesting to see if someone could use the clinch and use it to tire him out and slow him down. For Garbrandt, the plan's pretty clear. Hit him hard and knock him out. That's always been the Garbrandt plan. I really like the addition of the calf kick to his game, because that's another thing that complicates the job of the jabber. And if he ever finds that he's having trouble like slipping and countering the jabs or getting spooked by the shoulder feint, he can just go to the calf kick and try and hobble Rob Font and convince him not to jab, convince him to have like a kickboxing match or a swinging match. But there's a good amount going on in that one. And again, like if Cody Garbrandt wins this one, I don't think Rob Font's the worst matchup for him stylistically in the division. I don't think he's a very favourable matchup like a Sunsao was, but it's a very good name if he beats him to have on his record. Now, what else is happening on this card? Don't expect too much. Yan Jianan versus Carla Esparza. Yan Jianan, another part of the Chinese takeover. Not as interesting as Zhang Weili. She's the one that I was like, who's that Chinese lass who always opens with a side kick or a hook kick? And they put that in like the highlight package before the fight and then just throws 1-2s for the entire bout. This is her. And Carla Esparza, obviously the first strawweight champion in the UFC. Grindy, gutsy wrestler. Doing better on the feet recently, to be honest. And she did beat Claudia Gadelha. So, even though they didn't give her that win. And she actually has a win over Michelle Waterson recently and Marina Rodriguez. So she's actually quietly climbed the division in the most uninteresting way possible. What to look for? Carla Esparza to wear her dad's swimming t-shirt and then to get push kicked and for the foot to get stuck in the t-shirt. This could be interesting. You got Jianan good on the feet versus probably the stiffest wrestling test she's faced so far. I mean, Claudia Gadelha is a test, but Claudia Gadelha is also, miss 1.5 rounds. Esparza, to her credit, will tough it out through the full 3. And before that, Jianan's key wins are like Angela Hill, striker, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, striker. There we go. I think I did that justice. Justin Taffer versus Jared Vandeira is number 3 billing on this card. No, don't care. Felicia Spencer versus Norma Dumont, don't care. Although I do like Felicia Spencer. She can be fun sometimes. Well, she's mainly fun. Like her fight against Megan Anderson, where she pushes her to the fence, has the underhook, and then reaches around back behind her to catch trap the overhook and rolls underneath her in like a half guard sweep. It was the big nog sweep, but from the feet. It was very cool. And she throws a lot of lead leg high kicks, even though they don't have much on them. But then going down this card, like David Dvorak versus Ralian Paiva, both decent flyweights. And then right at the start of the main card, you could jerk in the curtain on the main card. Jack Hermansson versus Edmund Shabazian, the one that people probably care about. Hermansson coming off that fight of the night performance against Marvin Vettori. Really good fight. Even though Vettori got the decision, I think people remember that as like a one-sided beatdown. And it wasn't. I mean, Vettori was getting the better on the feet, but there were good wrestling moments. I mean, Vettori surprised me with his counter wrestling, but it was a good all-round scrap. But before that, he heel hooked Kelvin Gastelum in under 2 minutes, under a minute and a half, 118. And before that, he just froze against Jared Cannonier. He had that amazing little run of Talis Leites, Gerald Meerschaert, David Branch, Ronaldo Souza. Obviously, Jacare has aged out now, and that win hasn't aged tremendously well. But it wasn't long ago that he was pretty much on the cusp of a title shot. Meanwhile, Edmund Shabazian, this dude is only 23. That's insane. But he is the other fighter from Glendale Fight Club. He's a student of Edmund, but he's actually good. Was 10-0 undefeated prospect. Head kicked Brad Tavares in 2019. Got booked against Derek Brunson. Brunson came out and fought the fight of his life. It's just reserved when he needed to be reserved, aggressive when he needed to be aggressive. Knocked him out. TKO'd him in the early seconds of round 3, but was just dominant throughout. And it really, it looked like a kid versus a man. It looked like a guy who has all the talent in the world, but has not been in with this level of opposition. And Derek Brunson absolutely has. Now in Hermansson, you've got an interesting sort of step down in opponent because probably the better technical striker, but not the same hitter. Power is something that Jack Hermansson has always sort of lacked in a weight class full of guys who, you're getting up towards light heavyweight. Most of these guys can crack. And Hermansson is a decent wrestler, but he's certainly not like the force that Derek Brunson can be. And especially in that fight, because Derek Brunson, if he just runs after the clinch or dives after the legs like he has done in the past, he did it to Sam Alvey and managed to knock him out. But against Izzy, he was just face first, charging, trying to get the legs, and the same thing against Rob Whittaker. And you just can't do that against the elite of the elite. But against Shabazian, Brunson was establishing his was he southpaw or was he the orthodox? He was establishing his back leg kick and his rear straight, and he set them up. He got to the point where he was getting close enough that these were landing. And then once you're close enough that those are landing, that works if, standing close enough, that is. That means that your level change is going to look a little bit like either of those techniques. And the opponent doesn't have time to see you coming. They don't have time to see you sprinting for their legs. They're just going, oh, he's moving again. What's he been throwing at me? The left straight and the left high kick, or the right straight and right high kick, whatever it was. So you're worried about those. And that, his entries were so much more successful in that fight just by fighting smarter. And he fought Kevin Holland, and he just went back to just double legging him whenever he wanted to. So I think it's interesting because I think Shabazian might be strong enough to keep Hermansson from completing his takedowns. Hermansson was finishing, or at least cracking Vettori down from the head outside single, high crotch, whatever you want to call it, and just couldn't hold him down, couldn't keep him there. He was always able to get up, and I think you might see that against Shabazian here. And Shabazian probably has the edge in power and speed. However, Hermansson, while he doesn't have the power and he isn't super explosive, very, very good at establishing the jab, establishing feints, and building up volume. So I like that fight. I've always rooting for Hermansson. But Shabazian, he's in that position where he could just leap into the center of the division and be a very fun addition to the top end. Oh, and he's managed by Ronda Rousey. So if you see her in the crowd, or actually she's preggo at the moment, but yeah, that's the weird link that always comes up whenever he fights. Like how some of the fighters are personally managed by Endeavour as a talent agency. Oh, Michelle Waterson is. There we go. That would be that connection we were trying to work out earlier. Sketchy. What else is happening? Bill Algeo, the casino from Ocean's 11, love that joke, versus Ricardo Ramos. That was moved back because, was it Ramos had COVID or something happened? But Ricardo Ramos, super exciting striker, has to redeem himself because last time he fought, he took a year off and then he fought again, and he spent the whole year learning how to do the, is it a Rabona, the behind your own leg kick? And I was trying this the other day on the bag because I was like, what a silly kick. And then I tried it, and you have to get so close to pull it off. You're putting yourself in danger for nothing. There is no reward. He built nothing off it. So I called it a high risk. There are high risk, low reward moves, and this is a high risk, no reward move. And he did it. It was the only technique that he really landed in his last fight, and then he lost. But he has sparked people with spinning back elbows. He's got a great kicking game. He was just acting like a dickhead in his last fight for no reason. So quite looking forward to that. And Bill Algeo is good too. So yeah, Ben Rothwell was fighting some schlub, I can't remember, but that schlub pulled out. Now we got Chris Barnett. If you don't know Chris Barnett, he's going to lose, but he's a legend on the regional MMA scene, kind of like Gegard Mousasi. But he's ranked number 1 in South Korea. But he's a super heavyweight guy. He's a big fat dude. He's quite squat for the weight class. Yeah, he's only 5'9", fucking hell. But he fights at super heavyweight. And he does all kinds of cartwheels and spins and flips and shit. It's incredible for a man of that size. He's going to lose, but I hope he doesn't because he's brilliant. He's one of those fighters who really is more successful as a... it's like when Colt Cabana runs, comes through town. He's got his moves, he's got his spots. You'd go and see him once or twice, but you're not going to go back every time. He just takes his show from town to town. Claudio Silva versus Court McGee, fun enough. Victor Rodriguez, Bruno Silva, don't know. Yeah, some of these guys I don't know. Yancy Medeiros versus Damir Hadzovic. I put some money on Hadzovic in this one, I think, and I had a parlay with a couple of the other favourites. But Hadzovic, when I got to him, was an underdog, which was a little bit weird. Because Yancy Medeiros has had flashes of excellence, but very hit and miss. And on a 3-fight losing streak, and his 3-fight losing streak extends back through Donald Cerrone knocking him out, and Gregor Gillespie just manhandling him on the ground, and Lando Venata decisioning him in his last one. Last win was Alex Oliveira, who he did knock out, to be fair, but Eric Silva, that's how long ago this guy won. I was super hot on him after he obliterated Eve Edwards back in 2013. Fucking hell. Oh, wow. Apparently that was a no contest. I presume he got caught smoking weed or something. Doesn't say here. But since then, his real problems have been against... Well, I mean, he's been knocked out by a lot of big hitters, but he's also had real problems against grapplers. He's just He's a good fighter, but I don't know if he's at that top level. And Hadzovic himself is decent, but just got lost the decision to Christos Giagos and got choked out by Renato Moicano in under a minute. And then Moicano wanted to keep fighting him. That was good. So I mean that'll be fun if anything. And then your opener for the whole event is Damir Ismagulov versus Rafael Alves. Ismagulov is proper fun. I've been enjoying him. Lovely spazzy punching technique, as you would expect from Russian fighter or someone fighting out of Russia. He fights out of Fighter Gym, which is the name of the gym, and then they've got a wicked shield with a crest of arms. But he's on a 17-fight win streak. And his last win is over Thiago Moises, who just got ranked. Do you know why? Do you know why Thiago Moises just got ranked? Because they booked him against Islam Makhachev. But yeah, interesting. Like that's his last win, and that was 2019. So he's really been out of action throughout the entire pandemic. Also, not a great finisher. I think I said that already. But yeah, so I mean that's fun enough. And Rafael Alves is a guy who has a lot to come back from because he's not actually fought in the UFC yet. He's ranked on Tapology has him ranked second on the regional scene in the US. He was the Titan FC champion in the division, and he choked a guy on the Contender Series and was signed to the UFC. But then he was booked to fight Pat Sabatini back in February, and he managed to do the largest weight miss ever in the UFC. That's including John Lineker. But he missed the weight class above him. So even as I don't even know if the commission lets that go if that happens. Normally you get the option of being like, you can have 20% of their person that you have to fight them overweight, but some of them the commission's just like, no chance that's going ahead. So yeah, he's got a lot to come back from that. His excuse was like he ate some bad salmon and then was sick everywhere and shit everywhere, and you're like, well, that would make you lighter surely. And then he was like, I had to drink a load of water, so he somehow drank 11 pounds worth of water or whatever it was. But honestly, who's to doubt? These guys cut it so fine on the weight cuts nowadays, and there's no way around it because we can be like, you're cutting too much weight, but everyone else is doing the same. So you have to do it to be even close to competitive. And then the Bellator fights this weekend: Chris Cyborg versus Leslie Smith 2. Just super necessary. I love Leslie Smith for her work trying to get fighters' rights, and the fighters were like, fuck off, we want to fight for pennies. But yeah, she's probably not going to win this one, but I hope she does. Darian Caldwell's back versus Leandro Higo, who's also pretty good. Yep, fun stuff. Fabian Edwards, brother of Leon Edwards, is going to be fighting Austin Vanderfort, spouse of Paige Van Zandt, who are also both good, by the way. they're not actually, it's not just name value, they are legitimate prospects. Guy called Christian Edwards, who I don't think is the third Edwards brother, but could be. Sadawad's on the card. Aviv Ghazali is on the card, famous for his dad having the sketchiest looking match I've ever seen when they went to Israel. And Valerie Loreda's on the card. There we go. Oh, and Brett Johns. Oh, wow, cool. Oh, they've done that thing again where they put the British fighters on the very first fights so that people can actually stay up and watch it, which I almost like, actually. They do a lot of things just because I say it on the pod, so I presume this is another one of those. But Alfie Davis, who is a guy from London Shoot Fighters, I think he's the striking coach there. MVP is also a striking coach there, but I think he is one of the striking coaches there. And he's fighting Alexander Shabli, who is also very good. And then you've got Brett Johns versus Danny Sabatello. Don't really know anything about Sabatello, but I do know that Brett Johns is good fun. So yeah, watch the first 2 fights on that. And we'll do some questions before we get out of here for this week. Hi Jack, during my second year undergrad, I wrote a research proposal titled Decision Theory Within Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When I was researching literature, I found a profound lack of research into MMA, BJJ, etc. Have you ever thought about writing a research paper on MMA or BJJ? And why do you think this area has not been researched yet? Kind regards from Hamza. No, my degree isn't in anything useful, so I don't think I can bring anything to that field. But, I mean, sports science itself is pretty fucking niche. Basically, I listen to, who is it? Greg Knuckles. He does a great podcast. Is it Stronger by Science or is it String Theory still? He changed from one to the other. But he does a great podcast where they talk about basically all the papers that have been studied, been published in the last week or two or whatever it was on lifting or exercise science or whatever, or dieting or anything like that. And, you know, the thing that you're always blown away by is that the sample sizes are always like 15 people. You know, like for some reason, there's just fuck all interest in actually funding sports science studies. And part of that is why we're still, you know, leaning so heavily on like the research from the Soviet Union, because when the Olympics was actually like a matchup of ideologies and played, you know, was a much bigger thing. You know, time and effort put into study was actually, there was actually a reason to pump funding into studying shit like that. But then when you talk about BJJ MMA, niche within a niche, and even at the highest levels, there's not much money in it. So I can't see people looking at it and going, that's where I'm going to make my name. But if you feel like you can, by all means do. I'd love to have some more fucking scientific research done into MMA. The UFC Performance Institute just dropped a 400-page PDF on their like concussion protocol and studies of fighters who have been knocked out in fights recently and stuff like that. So that was quite interesting. I've not read it, you know, past like page 3, but definitely something being done there. Hi Jack, it's not really a question, but more of a comment to say thank you for sharing your righteous indignation at the treatment of Hibiki Ryu and other fighters. It's good to hear somebody with technical knowledge spouting off about how fighters should be treated. I'm proud to support you on Patreon. I'll throw in a related question in the end. As fight fans, what is the best way for us to support the fighters? Is there any way we can support them other than buying their merchandise? Keep up the good work. Cheers, Tom. Well, my suggestion was merchandise. You know, there are guys like, well, there are some people who have like a sponsorship deal with, you know, an athletic brand or whatever, and they'll make t-shirts or shorts and so on. You know, you'd be able to get like specific pairs of shorts when fighters were actually allowed to wear their own shorts, like the famous orange Alistair Overeem shorts. And I would love to get the pink shorts that Lorenz Larkin wore in his second fight in Bellator. But you know, so that's not really an option anymore. Because the thing is, like, even if the fighter doesn't get any of that money, you're showing that you're buying it because it's related to that fighter or because, you know, the fighter wore it. And then you would hope that the sponsor would give them more opportunities or money or whatever. Yeah, I mean, the thing with this is that we are all in agreement, except the absolute muppets who jump in on Dana White's posts to be like, yeah, you get it done, boss. Most of us are agreed that fighters deserve more money. There isn't really a way to express your anger at the UFC without pirating it. And there isn't really a way to give money to fighters without buying UFC pay-per-views and cheating into UFC cards. So, yeah, it's a little... The disconnect there is part of what prevents fighters from earning more money. Honestly, though, while this pandemic's been going on and guys haven't been able to get fights, especially in smaller promotions, a lot of female fighters have been taken to OnlyFans, and it's been a great laugh, you know, being like Jessica Ice selling nudes for $7,000 or whatever it is. But honestly, probably the most direct way you can affect or you can give money to a fighter or support a fighter. Not saying I do, but, you know, there should be some way, you know, some male fighters need to work out an equivalent of that. I don't know, there might be a big thirsty gay community within MMA. But anyway, yes, it's very hard to get your money to fighters. There are a couple of fighters who have done their own branding. I think Cub Swanson has his Killer Cub brand. And honestly, like, the other thing about this Reebok stuff, not Reebok stuff, but Reebok, Venom, whatever, not only are you taking sponsorship options and money away from fighters, it also just limits fighters' creativity. There are so many fighters who actually have good ideas for shit like that. And there are fighters who have, like, graphic design degrees and things, you know, that really could be putting an interesting impact on the sport, and you're taking that away from them. And then the other one that I can think of is instructionals. You know, obviously I'm going to shout out my boys at BJJ Fanatics, but Jiu-Jitsu did great stuff too. Warrior Collective does good instructionals. There's another UK one that I can't remember. They did a couple of really good ones. But yes, there are a few now that basically give fighters a chance to teach their stuff. Obviously, you know, a little bit of a pain because you're sort of having to teach the stuff you want to use, you know, but that is another way you can get money to the fighters. And also just find good sponsors. Find sponsors that you feel like probably are getting their money to the fighters. You know, but you don't hear a lot of like Was it John McDacey? He had a company called like Fear the Fighter or something like that, and there was a huge dispute. It might have been Musashi even, but being like, yeah, I agreed to be sponsored by him and he didn't pay me. But you don't hear things like that about Scramble or Hayabusa typically. Try and do that, go for brands that sponsor fighters and are going to pay them and have a good reputation. Also, Scramble, if you're listening, hit me up for those Scramble X Slacky design crossovers. Yeah, I really can't think of any other ways. But I've said this before, there should be a way, even if you don't have like everything is done by fucking app now or online. So there should be a way for you to have a set like portion of your pay-per-view buy assignable as bonuses. And even if you only get one, give it to a fighter on that card who did something you enjoyed. But yeah, again, that's the only reason that isn't implemented is because the UFC don't want people to decide who gets the money. And they certainly don't want like a trackable way of proving that people are draws or well-liked when they're going to negotiate with these fighters and say, you just don't move the needle, Nate Diaz, despite being in our biggest selling fight ever. Cheers, Tom. Well, some dickhead seems to be soaring through metal while hanging out the side of a helicopter outside my window, so I'm going to call it a day there. If you want to get in on the extra shit we do for the Patreon boys, including my absolute masterclass Garbrandt versus Cruz, which I'm very proud of, lots of doodles and illustrations of footwork and how it's as much about how Cody Garbrandt beat Dominic Cruz as what Dominic Cruz normally does. Go and join the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. And I don't say it often, but share the podcast with all your friends and enemies, and we'll make a deal, and I'll be an extra 10% funny next time, just for you. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Neck tats bless.